beg you. Don't kill me.
I'm not going to kill you. Your job will be to tell the rest of them that death is coming for them tonight. Tell them Eric Draven sends his regards.
Hey, yo, how the hell's it going, friends? It's Shawn the Butcher here with Vertebrae33 for a brand new emotional episode 29 of our ridiculously numbered themed system in Madness Pod. How's it going, Vertebrae?
What's going on, Shawn? If you can tell, my lights are dimmed even more for this episode.
Right before we recorded, I was like, lights on, lights off. Lights on, lights off. I went with lights off as well.
Yeah. Receding into the darkness for this episode.
Make sure you follow us on the socials, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Threads at In Madness Pod. Hit us in the mail sack. We will be diving in there for our next 0.5. If you want to be part of this show, email inmadnesspod@gmail.com. You can check this show out on YouTube to see Vertebrae receding into the darkness like Bruce Wayne in the Batcave. Give us the 5-star reviews. Hit us with the likes. Give us some comments. We will hit you back. Subscribe to the In Madness Spotify playlist, which I think I started for this movie because I needed a collection of songs from this soundtrack because it's one of my favorites of all time. Make sure you check out the In Madness Spotify playlist, which after these next couple of episodes will have probably like 7 or 8 brand new songs. Happy In Madness Monday, if that is indeed when you're listening, enjoying your long weekend. Hopefully you're off today from work. If my math is right from when this episode drops. Hope you have a good day off. Enjoy your In Madness Monday. Spread the madness worldwide. Spread the tentacles all throughout the world. Tell everybody you know about this show. And if you want to get your In Madness podcast t-shirt, brand spanking new, check out In Madness Pod. Check out inmadness.com. Sorry, inmadness.com. And Vertebrae, what mug do you have for tonight's episode?
So I don't have a mug for this movie, so I tried to find one that was kind of more would fit it a little bit. So I've got a Batman mug for this.
Close enough.
So yeah, so we've got a lot of parallels with this, but it's a bad habit because it gets me thinking, I should have a mug for every single movie that we do on this podcast. They don't make a mug for every single movie. They have Crow mugs. They're okay. They're not great. Usually those mugs that just have like the poster on it and stuff, they're not that great. I like ones that are a little bit better, but I have a few like that because you have to if that's all they have. But I looked, I didn't see anything that jumped out to me. It backs me up again on my idea that there should be a store, an online store that you can go and just get any movie mugs you want from any movie in the last 50 years, right? If you want to go on with the win mug, you should be able to get one.
But before Vertebrae tells us what movie we are getting into, I want to thank our guest from last week, John Bellotti Jr., Robo7 on the socials, Kaiju Brooklyn. Shout outs if you went, if you enjoyed it. If you were there, take pictures, post them on the socials, tag us at Shawn the Butcher, at Vertebrae33, at In Madness Pod. One of my most fun episodes, if you couldn't hear the excitement in my voice talking about all things Godzilla. But yep, I'll stop going on about it. Vertebrae, would you like to tell us what episode 29 of In Madness Pod movie we are covering?
Here we go. One of the movies that was probably in our top 10, probably, of movies that we wanted to cover when we started this podcast. Definitely top 20. We're doing The Crow from 1994, not The Crow from 2024. From 1994.
I think we're doing this because of The Crow from 2020.
It's the anniversary of the original Crow, so we're right there. Released 1994, directed by Alex Proyas, who also directed Dark City, iRobot, and Knowing, which I never saw Knowing, and I kind of want to see that. Based on a comic series by James O'Barr, was originally published by Caliber Comics. The first 4 volumes in 89, and then the rest of the story comes out in 92 by Tundra Publishing, and then it gets reprinted by Kitchen Sink Press, which is the version that I have that I think everybody kind of picked up in the graphic novel format, more of a book format. And we'll get into James O'Barr a little bit as we go on. there's certainly differences between the comic and the movie, and a few of them we can talk about, but the comic is super influential. It's a black and white comic. If you've never read it, I certainly recommend reading it. James O'Barr's artwork is wild. It's all over the place. Like, there's some stuff that's painted, there's some stuff that's very stark black and white. It's all black and white, but some stuff's in gray tones. And it's just a super influential comic. And then it becomes this movie that, dare we say, kind of influences a whole generation of people. And the first thing you mentioned was the soundtrack. So this movie has an iconic soundtrack, but it also has a phenomenal film score. So what I have on vinyl, what I have on CD somewhere is the soundtrack from back in the day. And what I have on vinyl is the score, which was the original music written for the film. And that is a wild score. It's got a lot of kind of world music in it and weird percussion, and there's vocals, and if you've never heard the Crow score, because most people know the soundtrack, I would definitely dive into that. That is a fantastic listen. It's a listen anytime score. And so is the soundtrack. So the soundtrack comes out and blows people's minds. The comic mentions The Cure. It has lyrics from Hanging Garden in it, and James O'Barr has talked about Joy Division and bands like that. And we get the track listing, which I'm going to read off to you. It's The Cure, Burn, Machines of Loving Grace, Golgotha, Tenement Blues, Stone Temple Pilots, who I had to say that slowly because I always call them Stone Pimple Toilets. So I had to say it slowly, so I got it right. And so nobody knows I say that. But anyway, Big Empty, 9 Inch Nails, Dead Souls, Rage Against the Machine, Darkness, Violent Femmes, Color Me Once, Rollins Band, Ghost Rider, Helmet, Milk Toast, Pantera, The Badge, For Lisa, Not Lisa, Slipside Meeting, My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult, who's also in the film, The Jesus and Mary Chain, Snake Driver, Medicine, who's also in the film, Time Baby 3, and Jane Seabury, It Can't Rain All the Time. And what's interesting about this soundtrack is, and this movie, Shawn, is I don't know where you came to this film, but like, I already listened to The Cure a lot. I was a huge Cure fan. I was a huge Sisters of Mercy fan. I had gotten into Fields of the Nephilim. If you've never heard of Fields of the Nephilim, they're probably, in my mind, one of the greatest goth bands of all time, by far. And from a friend in high school got me into them. And so this movie comes out and I connect to it like, oh man, there's people already feeling the same way I feel and listen to music that I like. And I think other people came to it as like, whoa, what is this? And this kind of like inspired, I would say, like almost like the mall goth kind of thing after this. How did this film hit you?
So it was one of my first R-rated movies I became obsessed with because, as I had mentioned many times earlier in the beginning days of this podcast, Mother forbid that I watch horror movies. So I always had this itch to watch it, but was always too afraid of all the blood and the guts and whatever. And something about this movie grabbed me because it was rated R, but I knew it wasn't like a scary horror movie. It was something different. And I have such a deep connection to this movie. I may even cry during this podcast. It comes out in 1994, so I'm 11 years old. And I think what grabbed me about the movie was the lore surrounding it, because all of a sudden you hear that the main character, Brandon Lee, is killed during filming, and that the story is about a person who dies and comes back to life. And this blew my 11-year-old mind. There's nothing I love more than sharing embarrassing stories from my childhood. So I was addicted to this movie. I think even when like the previews were coming out, I don't know, maybe I saw commercials for it. I don't know what it was, but I remember I had a newspaper clipping of the movie showing. You know, I think it was Douglaston and Queens, New York, where I lived, and I taped the newspaper clipping of the movie poster to my bed. And I was obsessed with two songs at this time. One was on the soundtrack, one was not. One of them was Big Empty, Stone Temple
Mhm.
Pilots, which was like a big pushing selling point for this movie. The other song I was obsessed with at the time, because before I was listening to metal, I was heavy into grunge. So Pearl Jam's Alive was another song that I was obsessed with. I feel like the lyrics to Pearl Jam's Alive kind of fit this story so well, with the tragic passing and then him coming back a lot to life in this movie. And I remember being so obsessed with it that one time I had friends over and they were in one room, and I was so obsessed with it that I would sit with my Walkman in my other room and look at the newspaper clipping of the movie poster and listen to these friggin' songs, Pearl Jam,
Mm.
Alive, and Stone Temple Pilots, Big Empty. And my mom would walk in and be like, "What are you doing? Your friends are over and they're in the other room and you're
Mm.
sitting in here listening to your walk." I was just entranced with the entire aspect of the movie.
Yeah.
The soundtrack was incredible, but I didn't get to see it in theaters because I was 11 years old and I still wasn't able to get it. So I rented it from Blockbuster, which I remember, I think it was my first time like seeing and renting an R-rated movie. However, I finally, when it came out, immediately purchased it on VHS, which I have right here. If you're checking this out
Nice.
too, this is the original VHS with the Brandon Lee tribute at the end. I have been obsessed with this thing. It still works. It still plays. And also, it has a trailer for Halloween 6 in the beginning of it, which may have started it all for me,
Mm.
because I was at that time too frightened to watch all the horror movies. However, watching that Halloween preview over and over, and the music was in the preview over and over. I might post a preview on the socials just because it's one of the most, not one of the, Michael Myers 6, The Curse of Michael Myers, not one of the greatest movies. However, like, it hits such a nostalgic tone for me because it's on the opening of this VHS, so much to the point where I had a recorder and I would just record things walking around like I was Macaulay Culkin in friggin' Home Alone. And
Nice.
I recorded the preview for Halloween 6 onto a cassette tape so I could listen to it as like a mixtape in between songs and stuff. I was just upset. And I think that's how my obsession with horror started.
Mm.
And it was all through The Crow. It was like the gateway for me into
Amazing.
horror. So,
And that's awesome. And
yeah.
so we hit it in two completely different spots. So like I knew the comic. The comic was a big deal amongst independent publishers, and that the fact that they were adapting it was a big deal. The fact that Bruce Lee's son was in it, and kind of we really didn't know who he was, but we just kept hearing how fantastic he was going to be and how sort of groundbreaking this movie was. The trailer drops, and it's an incredible trailer. It shows way too much of the film, but it is an incredible trailer. So I was eagerly anticipating the release of this film, saw this film in the theater. Uh, by that time, I'm not, you know, vertebrae with Robert Smith hair, but there was a period of time where vertebrae existed with, Robert Smith or Echo and the Bunnyman hair. And I was these the 90s, we get into these soundtracks, these eclectic soundtracks, and we'll start mixing metal and hip hop like on the Judgment Night soundtrack and all of this stuff. And at that time I was listening to all of it. All of it. I was absorbing as much Ice-T and Ice Cube as I could Susie and the Banshees. So and that sounds like very much a product of the 90s, but it was kind of the late 80s and into the 90s. So this hit me, and I saw this movie a million times. And having not seen it for a little while now and waiting to get it on, eagerly anticipating, we talked about it, getting on a 4K and watching it again, what surprised me is how much of it holds up. And it's not just nostalgia. Like, there's some groundbreaking filmmaking in this film, and we'll get into it when we get into certain scenes, but so many things have borrowed from this after it came out, and we just sometimes realize it and sometimes don't realize it. They did go on to make sequels, and there was a TV series after this, but this one is,
Nothing came
yeah.
even remotely close to just how, yes, like the finger on the pulse of everything, with the music, with the soundtrack, with the score, with the acting, with the writing. It's got some of my favorite lines ever in movies. I mean, well,
Mhm.
I'm going to say it, I'll repeat it a million times, but I mean, I can easily say this is, again, without a doubt, one of my favorite movies of all time.
And so we'll get into the cast, but I'll say that the original score music written and by Graham Revell. He also did the score for Dead Calm, From Dusk Till Dawn, The Craft, Bride of Chucky, Tomb Raider, Daredevil, Freddy vs. Jason, and Sin City, which we'll probably talk about a few times during this. And then the cast: Brandon Lee is Eric Draven, the Crow; Rochelle Davis is Sarah; Ernie Hudson is Sergeant Daryl Albrecht; Michael Wincott is Top Dollar; Bailing is Micah. Micah? Yeah, I get that right. Sophia Shyness is Shelley Webster. Anna Levine is Darla. David Patrick Kelly is T-Bird. Angel David is Skank. These names in this movie crack me up every time. Lawrence Mason is Tintin. Michael Massey is Fun Boy. Tony Todd is Grange. And John Polito is Gideon. So are we ready to get the cat? By the way, Shawn, Gabriel the cat in the movie, I could not find this cat's name.
Possibly the only animal in Madness Pod that leaves unscathed.
Yeah. And we're going to get in the movie rundown, but just quickly, there's plenty of birds in this movie as well. And they used ravens for this film. So they're not crows, they're ravens. And there were 5 of them. And it was difficult to get them accustomed to flying in the rain. And, we're talking beginning of digital effects in a lot of ways, and they're struggling to get stuff done. So they had to actually train them to do a lot of this stuff, fly in a wind tunnel. One of them had to be comfortable sitting on Lee's shoulder. So they went through that. So they used ravens rather than crows. And then that took me down a whole path of what's the difference between a raven and a crow. And I know the beak from drawing them. The beak is a little different on the raven, and they have a little bit different of a call in it. But I think most people wouldn't know. I don't know if there's any bird people sitting in the theater yell that's a raven, not a crow.
I feel like that'd be you.
Maybe. I just leaned to the guy next to me. Excuse me, sir. Did you know that's actually a raven? And there were 5 of them in this.
I want to quickly congratulate you on your crow shirt that you recently posted, that we reposted on the In Madness social. Shout outs to that. It is friggin' awesome. Pick up your Vertebrae33 crow shirt.
Yeah, it's officially licensed crow shirt at Hot Topic. So you can go to, I think in the next week, you'll be able to go to all 700 stores. And right now it's online for sale too. You can get it anywhere. So
take a picture of yourself wearing it. We will repost it. Are you ready, Vertebrae? I might cry right now.
Okay. I'm ready.
The movie opens. We're above a city. Stop everything. Where are we? We don't know where we are. Dare I say it? Are we in Gotham?
Well, no. We're in Detroit, no?
Is it Detroit?
Yeah.
Well, honestly, okay. Yes, there is a blatant Detroit reference made in the middle of that. Okay.
But also
that
Devil's Night,
question.
I think, is a Detroit thing. But I'm going to go along with what you're saying, and this is, we get a very Gotham look right away. We also get these cool shots. They built these models, so they get the camera going over these models they built, and we're getting our first look at something that Sin City used a lot later on. They didn't build models, but Sin City look for that film is very reminiscent of this in a lot of places, and so are the Batman films. I think both Dark Knight and the Batman owe a lot to this movie and this story. But I do like the idea that it would be Gotham. Or where was 7 set?
We said Gotham, so I'm going to call this Gotham. I'm going to call this the same place wherever 7 is set, because it's always friggin' raining. However, it's October 30th. It's Devil's Night. The buildings are on fire. We hear police sirens racing through the streets. We're flying through the streets with the point of view of a bird. Sarah, the young girl, says, people once believed that when someone dies, a crow carries their soul to the land of the dead. But sometimes something so bad happens, a terrible sadness is carried with it, and the soul can't rest. And sometimes the crow can bring that soul back to put the wrong things right. We see a high-rise building, broken window lit up all red in the apartment. It's a crime scene. Photos flashing throughout the room. Ernie Hudson, Sergeant Albrecht. He's looking out the window, smoking a cigarette, looking down at the body laying in the street, being covered by a sheet, the body of Brandon Lee, Eric Draven, which, given what happened, and just absolutely crazy the way to start this movie within the first 32 seconds.
Yeah, and probably, there was certainly after, and we in the second part of this we can kind of get into what happened, but I imagine there was a lot of consternation on even releasing this film. I believe it was supposed to be Paramount, and Paramount dropped out, and then it became a Miramax film. Which, by the way, Miramax, when you see Miramax at the beginning of something, if that doesn't scream '90s film to you, like I don't know what does. Right? This movie does, Sean, have it, although it holds up, has a '90s written all over it, early '90s written all over it, and not in a bad way at all, but just you can just sort of really tell when it came out, from the music to everything else. But
I say it was the best of times. We see Shelley, his lover, alive but bleeding. She's in bad shape. Albrecht is checking the apartment. He sees pictures of the lovely couple all over the place and a band photo of Eric's group, Hangman's Joke. Albrecht finds a wedding invitation on the floor. Another cop calls for him. We see them looking at her wedding dress. Albrecht tells them their wedding was tomorrow night. The cop says, "Who the fuck gets married on Halloween anyhow?"
And what
Sergeant
does he
says,
say?
"Nobody."
I guess now nobody does.
The medics tell him they got to move Shelley now. They take her to the ambulance when one of the cops asks for the count so far. Albrecht tells him 143 fires. The cops say they're slacking off. Albrecht tells them 3 hours to go. Maybe they're just slow starters.
This all has a very like Seven feel. Like Seven has a feel of this in the beginning. We're even about to get a detective. We get a Somerset and Mills kind of deal going on. But
I feel like Somerset and Mills are 15 blocks away doing whatever they're doing on that side of town.
Yeah,
A
agreed.
crow lands on a pole outside the apartment and is watching this all happen. Outside, our angry head cop in charge, Torres. He's pissed at the medics for moving Shelley. "I should have been asked about this first. Leave the dying girl there. It's protocol." Torres asks Albrecht if this is the victim, and he says, "No, it's Amelia Earhart. We found her, and you missed it." Torres doesn't care what her name is. He should have been consulted before Shelley was moved. He says, "Jesus, no wonder they took away your gold shield." Albrecht says he wasn't a big enough asshole. Up pulls little Sarah on her skateboard. She sees the bodies covered with the sheet in the street. She pushes through the crowd. She runs up to Shelley on the stretcher, who asks for Eric. Albrecht says not to worry about him. Shelley says, "Tell him to take care of Sarah." They throw Shelley in the ambulance. Albrecht tells Sarah her sister's going to be okay. She says it's not her sister. "Shelley takes care of me. She's my friend, her and Eric. You lied to her about Eric, and you're lying to me about Shelley. She's going to die, isn't she?" Albrecht doesn't know what to say. Sarah's crying. Albrecht tells her it'll be okay. He tries to comfort her as the city is burning around them, and he turns, and in slow motion, the camera sort of freezes and fades, which is like cool. It's like a comic book almost.
Yeah, they do that a few times in this. And the little girl's name in the comic was originally Sherry, and I can't help but think, boy, how confusing these scenes would have been if it was Sherry and Shelly, like just going back and forth with that dialogue. That would have been really confusing in this. And it's funny, Albrecht is like a amalgamation of two characters from the book. And I'm not 100% sure where they got the name from for him, but Albrecht Dürer is a famous artist who did a lot of like detailed line art prints and stuff. So it's interesting. Known for a lot of black and white line art stuff too. So I'm curious if that came from that.
We cut to 1 year later. The crow flies onto the top of a building. Sarah says a building gets torched. All that's left is ashes. I used to think that was true about everything, families, friends, feelings. But now I know that if sometimes love is real, two people are meant to be together. Nothing can keep them apart. Sarah is walking through the graveyard, taking flowers off other graves, and approaches the graves of Shelley Webster and Eric Draven. And we get, again, that score that you're talking about, this absolutely incredibly depressing score that plays at times throughout this movie that just pulls every emotion out of your body. She puts most of the flowers on Shelley's grave and one on Eric's and says later, as thunder is rumbling in the distance. Plus, it's always raining here, like in Seven, which we also thought was Gotham.
Absolutely always raining. And then I have a logistical question for you, Sean. I'm going to pull you out of your about to cry and love this film. So they die, they get killed in their building, and they're both buried next to each other. They're not married yet, but whoever takes care of this decides to bury them next to each other. In a pretty rundown cemetery, by the way. There's like burnt out buildings next to it and everything. But so they have these beautiful tombstones. but whoever takes care of this doesn't go back in the apartment to like clear out the photos of them or like all of that. They just kind of leave all these personal belongings there and then wrap this part up and kind of take off. So that's really just a weird little logistical thing. Like you don't need it in the movie, but you know my brain goes there. Like who paid for the tombstones and you know.
You know whose parents were also in a graveyard like that? Oswald the Cobblepot from Batman 2.
Oh, that's true. Huh. Uh-oh.
The crow lands on Eric's grave. She asks if it's the night watchman. It yells at her. She skates away in the rain, and the crow starts pecking away on the grave.
And you know, one of the birds they use, one of the ravens' name is Magic. And I don't know the other one's names, but I always wonder if Magic was like really good at his job. So he was the one who does like the extra stuff.
You get to be in the film more. You're not a
Yeah.
pain in the ass.
Yeah.
We cut to one of the grossest scenes in this movie. We're at the hot dog stand.
Mm.
The vendor is just smothering this dog in ketchup. First off, gross.
Yes.
He tells Sergeant Albrecht, what this place needs is a good natural catastrophe, an earthquake or tornado. Then he picks up the mustard and begins smothering this hot dog with even more condiments. And Albrecht stops him. He's like, no, you're doing it all wrong. You got to put the mustard underneath first. And then Albrecht continues to smother this dog. The vendor continues, maybe a flood like in the Bible. Albrecht, he's still smothering the dog. Albrecht grabs the hot dog away from him. He's like, no, let me do it. He sticks the cigarette in his mouth and he begins smothering even more mustard on this already smothered dog. Then he wants some onions. So the vendor gives him a spoonful and he's like, don't be cheap. Give me more onions. Sarah pulls up to the hot dog stand and Albrecht picks up the ketchup now and smothers this dog even more in condiments. At this point, there's got to be no dog left. It's just 4 fat layers of ketchup and mustard and onions.
Oh, and you know, I don't like ketchup at all. I don't eat it on anything. I'm a mustard guy, so I'll even eat mustard on like my French fries. But so this is a pretty horrific scene. I imagine take after take, they must just squirting it into a container or something. I don't even know what that would look like after that.
Just globs and handfuls of ketchup and mustard. They ask Sarah how she steers a skateboard in the wet street. She says it's pure talent. Albrecht tells the vendor Sarah's a genuine hot dogger. He asks if she's hungry. She asks if he's buying. And it's nice to see how these two have become pals since the tragic events 1 year prior. Albrecht says he's buying. She says no onions. They make you fart big time. Cut to one of my favorite lines in a movie ever. We see a car in front of an arcade. We hear a man say, you know, Lake Erie actually caught on fire once from all the crap floating around in it. I wish I could have seen that. He whistles loudly and his goons start thrashing the arcade, bats, broken glass, the whole nine. Our lead thug, T-Bird, who's also the same guy from the Warriors, who says, Warriors, come out and play. He's setting up a bomb in the arcade.
And so he is correct. It was actually into Lake Erie from Lake Cuyahoga River. So it's the Cuyahoga River that flows into Lake Erie. It did catch fire in 1969, which set off this big, public outrage about this sewage and chemicals, industrial chemicals that are in the water. And, the Great Lakes at that time, there was so much oil in this river and into the Great Lakes that it was considered an ecological crisis for decades. So this river actually caught fire in 1868, 1883, 1887, 1912, 1922, 1936, 1941, 1948, and 1952, and then finally in 69. So if anyone tells you that people today aren't paying attention to the environment, I'm going to tell you they weren't paying attention to it in 1868 and could care less then as they dumped all these chemicals in there. Just insane. If you dive into this and start reading about it, you're just like, and people around that area are getting sick and people are born with illnesses and there's so much oil and sludge in it that's just catching on fire. And so
is this the first Detroit reference made in the movie?
Yes. Well, Devil's Night, I think. Devil's Night.
Oh, Devil's Night too.
Thing.
Okay.
But despite the fact that he got that fact correctly, I hate all of these guys. We're supposed to
Oh,
hate these bad guys.
yes, but I really like T-Bird's dialogue
Yeah.
throughout.
I like the dialogue, but I hate them. You know how now in a film they'll have a bad guy, but he'll be kind of like a cool
No,
bad
well,
guy.
they're all absolute scumbags. However, I
Yes.
mean, how do you not love Skank? I mean, he's just the funniest, worst, best thug. I don't know. It's just they are
But they,
hateable,
you
and they're
know, they
supposed
they're
to be
killing
hateable.
people and burning buildings down
Yeah,
and
yeah.
but yeah, they're just all like dirty and grimy and gross. Yeah, you're certainly if you give them the quippy lines is fine, but they have no redeeming. There
No,
was a hardcore band that called No Redeeming
no redeeming
Social
social
Value.
value. Yes,
That's
yeah.
these guys.
No, there's nothing likable about any of them, but they all are pretty funny.
Mhm.
So the crow lands on this cathedral, I guess. There's gargoyles and such all around. It's raining. We see the wet earth. It begins pushing up. And from inside of a casket, we see the lid being pushed off. And God damn it, here he comes, resurrected to right the wrongs. Brandon Lee, Eric Draven, in the suit he was buried in, not decayed in any way, shape, form, or fashion. He crawls out of his grave through the mud and falls to the floor screaming in agony.
Yeah, 1 year later, he's perfectly preserved. But he's not because we find out he has healing powers. So it leads me to believe that this force, this crow, gives him those powers, and then he's, you know, able to heal before he emerges because he has to heal to be able to push out of the. It's it reminds me, Shawn. They used to a long time ago. They used to put a release in a coffin so you could get out of it or something.
Did they have the bell? You can ring the bell.
Yeah, there was a bell, and then I think that sometimes they would put a hammer or something in there to like dig your way out or whatever, because it would happen more frequently probably than it does now. That there's no way to check the vitals, and somebody just like if you were at the Sanguisugabog show
They would have buried my ass.
and you just passed out, they're like, "Well, he's finished. We got a
If
hole in the back.
if this
Bury
was
him."
the witch times and I passed out during the
Oh,
witch
done, done.
Sanguisugabog show, that's it. I'd
Yeah.
have the bell. I'd be ringing the bell. Yeah, yeah.
Get a low enough pulse, a low enough heart rate, and they don't have things to sense it. So yeah,
It's like Nadu with Prey with her herbs and spices. It could cool my blood and yeah.
yeah. You would cool down so much that you just wake up and there's a famous short story, like a horror short story called, I think it's called "Where There's a Will." Maybe somebody can write in and tell me who wrote it, but it was in a collection of stories I had, and the guy wakes up, and we're diverting. I realize it, but he wakes up in a tombstone and he has like a lighter or something like that that says "Where There's a Will" on it. Anyway, he digs himself out of the grave and he's gasping and throwing up soil and everything, and he gets like a gas station restroom and realizes that he's actually dead, like he's a zombie. So like he was such a determined person in real life that he came back from the dead, and now it ends like that because he's just like, well, what do I even do, kind of.
That's some
But
Twilight Zone shit.
yeah.
Outruns T-Bird and his posse to his badass red car with the engine popping out of the hood. The goons are all laughing. T-Bird whistles and yells their awesome catchphrase, "Vertebrae, you got to do it with me. Come on. Fire it
Fire
up.
it up.
Fire it
Fire
up.
it up.
Fire it
Fire
up."
it up. This is not an endorsement in that gang in any way. In Madness podcast does not endorse Skank, T-Bird.
They just got some really cool lines and quips. We cut to Eric stumbling through the graveyard. He uses a tree branch to hold himself up. The crow flies over to him. T-Bird's car revs and drives off, and on the front we see the emblem on the car is also a bird, much like a crow.
Mm-hmm.
Eric stumbles through an alley. He's tearing off his clothes. T-Bird's car whips around the corner, and the boys are blasting Stone Temple Pilots' Big Empty. Absolute classic, adding it right now to the In Madness playlist on Spotify. The crow flies over to a dumpster and shows Eric where to get some boots. Confused, Eric seems to be following the crow. T-Bird's flying down the road in his car. One of the goons yells, "Oh shit, T-Bird, cop car." And T-Bird is nice enough to slow down, and they cruise past Sarah and Albrecht, munching down on their condiment-filled hot dogs. Albrecht says, "Bad people out in the street tonight." And kablooey, the bomb goes off and the whole arcade gets torched, blown to pieces, and Albrecht runs off. The crow leads Eric to a ladder to climb up to the roof of the building. Eric follows. He rips open the door, and we get this awesome shot of the crow flying directly toward the camera as Eric opens the door.
Yeah, they do a lot of viewpoint shots in this movie of the Crow, but also some stuff from inside the cars when they're racing along. And um all right, it's just some really good filmmaking and cinematography in this film.
Eric's walking like a zombie through this trash building towards his old apartment, which still, all this time, 1 year later, still has crime scene tape on the door. And from Eric's point of view, we tear the tape off the door and enter, and the place is still trashed.
Hmm.
A little white cat walks up to Eric and he says, Gabriel, and reaches down to pet it. But the second he touches it, like Rogue, he's got these powers where he can absorb things from people. And he gets a flashback from years ago of the cat biting one of T-Bird's goons. Eric falls to the floor in pain. We flash back and knock at the door. Shelly goes to answer. T-Bird and his goons kick open the door and says, Department of Housing code violation, safety hazard. Place looks fine to me. They grab Shelly. They cut to now we see Eric writhing on the floor in pain, feeling all of this happening again. T-Bird says, let's redecorate, and his goons begin trashing the place.
And Gabriel is in the comic as well. There's actually a bunch of cats that follow him around in the comic, but he gets the cat after he starts killing, so it wasn't their cat. So in the comic, and he gets it, and he says like, "Oh, Shelley would always wanted a cat," or something like that, and then he gets the cat after. So that was a little bit of a change, but the cat, made it through the comic and into the movie, which is
Every good hero needs a cat. That's what I think. T-Bird says, abashed, the devil stood and felt how awful goodness is. Saw virtue in her shape. How lovely. It's pornography.
Mhm.
T-Bird screams virtue as he slaps Shelly to the ground. They tear off her blouse. In walks Eric, and one of T-Bird's goons chucks a knife at him, and we see him fall to the floor. All the goons then take turns raping Shelly, and the goons pick up Eric. And I don't know if you know or not, but I think this is where it happened. I'm almost positive this is the scene they filmed where Brandon Lee died.
I don't know the exact scene, but I do know that they're quoting Milton's Paradise Lost, and that's the book that he holds up when they're going through and trashing the apartment. So we again, and Seven comes out after this, we again get connections to Seven as well because of that kind of stuff.
Well, look what I got for you here. T-Bird and one of his goons, Fun Boy, they point their guns at Eric and shoot him. And I think it was like in one of the haunted films in like that Shutter series or whatever, and the Crow was part of it. And when they picked him up and shot him, I think it was Fun Boy's gun who was botched or compromised. There's also conspiracy theories. Have you heard any of the conspiracy theories, or do you want to get into them for episode 2?
I didn't. I steered away from them just because I don't know. I felt weird about it.
Yes.
Because of
there are conspiracy theories, but anyway, Fun Boy's gun malfunctioned. The blank ended up, I think, actually shooting and killing Brandon Lee, and it messed him up for years. He left acting for a while, but did return in the movie Seven. He's the owner of the spot where I think lust was written on the wall, and panicky guy was forced at gunpoint to bang the girl with the knife dildo, which has me thinking maybe that's actually Fun Boy in Seven, and maybe what happens to him later in this movie didn't kill him. And maybe he survived and ended up running that sex place, which is why he sort of seems like kind of the same character, but years later and all messed up. Like, again, I feel like it's the same world.
And you know what's crazy is Seven comes out 95. So this comes out in 94, Seven comes out in 95. But this will happen in Hollywood a lot. They will film movies. You get like Ants and Bug Life that come out within like 6 months of each other or something. People know what other people are doing. Sometimes people might work on other films. They're drawing from the same kind of crime noir influences. But it's interesting. I've never heard David Fincher directly mention The Crow, but there is so many parallels to Seven that I can't help but think that. And I don't know when they started production on Seven, but I can't help but think that there's some of it bleeding into this.
They shoot Eric. We see him stumble backwards. He falls out the window like Hans Gruber. Meanwhile, Eric is reliving this all again in his brain, his apartment, till he runs towards a broken window, grabs the frame, flips out into the rain above the city and back into the apartment. There's blood all over the broken glass he just grabbed. He looks at his hands as the blood sucks back into his hands and he heals completely.
So we get our Jesus Christ, Jesus stigmata moment with him. We'll get one later on again. So there's a lot of that going on with him as well. But also, I'll say it right here, because online you'll read about this movie and too many people will say it's a superhero film, and it's not a superhero film. This is, he may care about Sarah and the neighborhood a little bit, but this is a revenge film. It's goth and it's moody and it's beautifully shot, but it's not, he's not a superhero. He hasn't come back to save everyone. He's just come back to button up what he has to do, and once he buttons it up, it's time for him to go back. So yeah, too many people, I think, they want to just say, oh, this, because it's based off a comic book, oh, it's a superhero movie, but it's, much different than that.
I don't want him in the fucking MCU. I'm good. Just leave it at this, please. Cut to a bullet flipping in the air. Funboy catches it in his mouth and drinks it with a shot. So T-Bird puts his bullet on his tongue, says, here's the devil's night, my new favorite holiday. He drinks the bullet with the shot and burns his tongue with his cigar. Funboy laughs, hits him, and says, you sick fuck. Another goon, Skank, goes to take a shot, but at the other goon, Tintin, slams Skank's hands down. Tintin puts a bullet in his mouth, shoots it back with a shot, and tells Skank, pussies drink last, man. Skank pulls out a gun and puts it in his face. Fuck you, Tin. Tin pulls out a knife and puts it to Skank's throat and says, shit ain't even loaded, man. Funboy puts his gun to Tin and says, this one is. As Tin pulls out his other knife, T-Bird jumps into action, grabs his gun and points it at everyone's face and says, which one of you Motor City motherfuckers want to bet me this one isn't? Motor City, another Detroit reference.
Yeah, hate these guys. Hate every bit about these guys right here. Also, Shawn, if you eat a bullet, if you swallow a bullet, what happens if you had like explosive diarrhea? Would you shoot the toilet? Would you blow up the toilet?
I would
bowl?
think
Like,
the acids would kill you. I think the acids would fire off the gun and you would die immediately. I just feel like it's a stupid thing that stupid criminals are doing.
Oh, yeah, these guys are the worst. I hate their chant. I hate their faces. I don't like them at all.
They're all standing there with guns to each other's head, dumbfounded, until T-Bird pulls it all together and gets everybody to say, hey, fire it up, fire it up. They all chant around and they're celebrating. Darla, the waitress, comes over to the table with more shots, tells them all to put their guns away. She ends up being Funboy's girl. Cut back to the apartment. Roach on the floor. Crow scoops it up. It's having himself a snack. Eric is at Shelly's makeup table. There's like an acting mask. I don't know what it's called, but it's painted on the side of all the acting classes. The happy face mask and the sad face mask. The sad face mask is hanging on the mirror. Eric touches it and flashes back to him and Shelly playing with the mask. He opens a drawer. It's full of pictures of Shelly. He picks them up and flashes back to them both holding each other, saying how much they love each other. He finds a wedding magazine. We see Sarah and Shelly showing off the new wedding dress. Eric remembers making love with Shelly and becomes overwhelmed and punches the mirror, which begins one of my favorite songs on this soundtrack, Burn by The Cure. And I'll say it now, I'm not all too familiar with a lot of The Cure's catalog outside of the hits, whatever they play on the radio. I'm not a huge Cure guy. However, I will blast this song constantly. I feel like it perfectly encapsulates this movie, and I'm definitely adding it to the Id Madness playlist.
Absolutely. And also, if you notice, Shawn, the good guy listens to The Cure and the bad guys listen to Stone Temple Pilots. So, that's where we go. If you want,
I identify with a little bit of them both. Some of them are funny. They got liners, even though they're kind of shit. Yeah.
But some of these scenes that they did, if we go back a little bit too, when he kind of grabs the window and jumps back and all back through the window, when we were talking about that, they had to kind of digitally add him to some things. So they used some digital effects because they had to finish some of this film after he had passed away. So they had to do some pickup shots and everything. So
Eric throws everything off this table. We see him begin applying white makeup, like the mask hanging on the mirror. He's applying the black liner. The Cure song is playing in the background. It all fits so goddamn perfectly together. Once he's done, the crow flies over to a closet. Eric follows it and opens it up. He finds a briefcase. I think it's his stage outfit from when he performed with his band, leather pants and a tight black shirt. He walks up, he pets Gabriel and begins walking toward the broken window he fell out of when he died. The rain is pouring, the Cure is blasting in the background. The crow flies onto his shoulder. And I'm just going to put it right here, my friends. This brings me to my milking of the alpacas moment. This dude looks so badass, and with everything going on, this scene is just an absolute emotional peak with the music, the atmosphere, the story, the culmination. Everything that's happening has happened that's led to this moment. He walks up to the window, the crow's on his shoulder, the camera's behind him. He turns to the front. All we see is this dark silhouette outline of him until the lightning cracks, and we get this quick glimpse of him now complete as the crow. The camera pans all the way back as Eric is looking out the broken window, seeking revenge. The crow flies out the window into the night. The rain is pouring. The music is blasting. Lightning is cracking. And we still see Eric standing there. I absolutely love this goddamn scene. We cut to Gideon's pawn shop. Another character here in Gotham.
Hate that guy.
Tintin's trying to sell him some rings. Gideon says they're probably fake. Tin tries selling him a leather purse. Leather. He says, "Oh, Tintin, what is this? Blood on here? I'll give you $50. Take it or leave it." Not too pleased, Tintin takes the money, but not before telling Gideon he's a cheap-ass, chrome-dome, child-molesting, saprophyte motherfucker. I don't know what a saprophyte is. Do you?
No.
I'm going to look it up. I guarantee it's the worst thing ever. Gideon tells him to close the gate when he leaves. Tintin flips him the bird. He leaves. He locks the gate. And again, another amazing song off this soundtrack. 9 Inch Nails' Dead Souls begins playing, which I am adding to the In Madness playlist.
Right, and that's a Joy Division song that they're covering. But also, why did this guy lock the gate? Like, why did
I don't know.
He left, he's arguing with him, but he actually grabs the lock. It's a weird little note there of like, why would you care?
He still does him a solid. I don't know why.
Yeah, because he's going to come back. I imagine this banter probably happens all the time from them. They need to sell
with
this
every customer.
Somebody. Yeah, but do they all work for the same guy? Because later on, he's there complaining to the other guys. So, like, they all have the same boss?
Well, everybody answers the top.
Yeah.
Everybody. And that's so funny. I've watched this movie a cajillion billion million times and didn't know his name was Top Dollar until I was researching it for this podcast.
Also, like, his business doesn't make any sense. We'll get into it later.
I don't know how he makes money from what he's just destroying everything, but yes, I understand his business. It's a terrible business.
Yeah, the business model. I need to see his prospectus and see what he makes enough money.
What do his Excel sheets look like as far as profit and destruction go?
Yeah, what is his OIBDA, they call it, right?
EBITDA. The crow begins flying through the city. Eric is following right behind it, jumping from rooftop to rooftop. The crow stops and yells at the edge of a building. We see it look down in black and white. We see it looking at Tintin. We see Eric seeing this through the crow's eyes. The crow flies off and Eric runs to the edge and sees Tintin. The crow flies down to a barrel on fire in the alley. It looks at Tintin. Eric sees him clearly and the crow flies off and Eric puts his plan into motion. Tintin lights his cigarette from the flaming barrel as Eric swan dives off the top of the building into a pile of trash and begins laughing his ass off. Tintin hears him. He looks down the alley and through the fire we see the silhouette of Eric. He's walking toward Tintin, who asks, "What the fuck you all painted up for, crackhead? Halloween ain't till mañana." Eric is lurking menacingly toward him. Tin pulls out a knife and kicks the flaming barrel at Eric, who tackles him. Tin punches Eric in the face, who just absorbs it and shakes it off and grabs Tin and throws him against the wall. The men fight. Eric slaps away Tin's knife and throws him across the alley against the wall. Eric picks him up and screams, "Murderer!" Tin says he didn't murder anybody. He doesn't know him. And Eric says, "I want you to tell me a story. A man and a woman aloft a year ago." Tin says, "You're out of your fucking mind." And Eric screams, "Listen," which I feel Heath Ledger literally picked that exact line up when he was the Joker in Batman. He delivers it pretty much the exact same way.
Yeah, we'll get to some Heath Ledger stuff.
Eric maniacally says, "I'm sure you'll remember you killed them on Halloween." Tin says, "Yeah, whatever," and spits in Eric's face, who slaps him in his mouth and says, "You cut her, you raped her." Tin says he still barely remembers this, and he was like, "Yeah, Shelly, she loved it," which disturbs and distracts Eric. So Tin punches him off, picks up a pipe, and smashes Eric with it. Tin says, "Let me tell you about murder. It's fun, it's easy, and you're going to learn all about it." Tin takes off his badass leather jacket and drops it on the floor, and we can see the crow looking at him, so Eric can see this as well. Tin is holding his knives, saying, "I'd like you to meet my two buddies. We never miss." Eric gets up and approaches Tin, who chucks a knife, but Eric ducks. It hits the wall. Tin chucks another, and Eric slaps it away. "Try harder. Try again," he says. Tin chucks another knife, and Eric catches it in his goddamn hands, and Tin looks worried.
Yeah, this guy, I can't stand this Tintin guy, Shawn. Let's just skip the rest of his parts for the rest of this movie after this scene.
There's no more parts because
I'm kidding.
Eric chucks the knife at Tintin, but Eric is far away when he chucks it. And I love this because he chucks it and it hits Tintin really quick. And it seems as it hits Tintin, somehow Eric is like at the speed of light, like he zips toward him, like horror movie style, and delivers one of my favorite lines ever. "Victims, aren't we all?" and stabs Tintin.
Yeah, one down. One of these awful human beings is down. It's cool. You notice here they'll switch between Eric Draven's vision and the crow's vision, and the crow's vision is a little bit different and kind of wavering and stuff. So you'll see his viewpoint cut back and forth. Very cool.
Yeah, the crow's vision is in like black and white, and Eric's vision is in like color. I noticed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we cut to T-Bird and Skank at the club. T-Bird walks by and brushes past a picture of Eric Draven and his band Hangman's Joke. T-Bird says he's going to go upstairs and report. Skank just goes to the bar and with his gun out like it's no big deal, just begins ordering drinks. T-Bird goes upstairs to the large man guarding the door, and who is it? It's Candyman, Tony Todd, as Grange. Yeah, the right-hand man to our head gangster.
Oh, I never saw Candyman. So
oh yeah, we gotta get that. Yeah, Cabrini Green. Yeah, the bees. Yeah,
it's not on the list.
we gotta put it on there. That's a classic. T-Bird tells him, "Guess what? Arcade games fell down, went boom." Grange tells T-Bird to gather his soldiers. They're on for tomorrow night. T-Bird asks if the man is in. Grange says he's taking a meeting and winks. Inside the room, we see a long-haired man in bed with a naked woman. Then another naked woman is taking a shower. She's got a wicked back tattoo. Our long-haired man is Top Dollar, our big dog, the leader of the gang of gangs. Anything grimy happens in Gotham City, it's going through Top Dollar.
You're just embracing the Gotham City.
He's looking at the Krampus snow globe. The girl from the shower approaches him. He hugs her. She tells him he's thinking about the past. Dollar is crying. He's an emotional gangster. He tells her, "Dad gave me this for my 5th birthday." So they're brother and sister. So there's some weird incestual relationship happening here.
Yeah, I mean, they say it later on. It's weird. It's this. I'm going to say it again, Shawn. I don't like these two either. There's nothing cool about any of these people. I don't like any of them.
Dollar says their father told them childhood's over the moment you know you're going to die. She takes the snow globe and it's this awesome graveyard inside. She kisses Dollar on his forehead. The girl asks, "Is she asleep?" He rolls over the naked girl in bed and she falls over dead and says, "I think we broke her." So this brother and sister duo are fucking people to death.
And taking their eyeballs out.
The girl grabs a knife, crawls over to the body and says, "I love her eyes, pretty," and slowly lowers the knife to the dead girl's face. We cut to Sarah skating through the street. She pops into the pit where Darla works, where the goons were drinking bullets. Darla's making out with Funboy. Sarah gets her attention. Darla says, "I told you, stay out of here." Sarah says, "I guess you won't be home till later, huh, Darla?" Funboy says, "They're busy." Darla gives Sarah some singles and says to get food. Sarah says, "Somebody already bought me dinner, the police." Funboy shoots her a long look till she grabs the money and leaves, and then Funboy makes fun of her. "Somebody already bought me dinner, the police."
Hate that Funboy. Hate that Funboy.
We cut to the crow flying up to Gideon's pawn shop. Gideon's counting his money on the glass top counter. Shadow approaches the door. Gideon yells, "It's closed." The Shadow bangs on the door. Gideon calls him a dusthead, tells him to go sleep it off somewhere else unless he wants to get mutilated. The Shadow tears open the front gate. Gideon grabs his gun and says he's going to blow this guy's dick off. Goddamn creatures of the night, they never learn. And through the glass door, we see Eric Draven's face approaching. He knocks again and then breaks through the glass door. Eric says, suddenly I heard a tapping as if someone gently rapping at my chamber door. Where's it from, Vertebrae?
That's Edgar Allan Poe. Quote the Raven, nevermore.
Which is also a great Simpsons Halloween episode. Highly
Mhm.
recommend you check that one out from the early days. Eric brushes the glass off his shoulder and approaches Gideon. You heard me rapping, right? Gideon says, you're trespassing. You owe me a new fucking door. Eric says, I'm looking for something in an engagement ring. Gold. Gideon takes his gun and says, yeah, you're looking for a coroner. Shit for brains. And blasts Eric right through his shoulder. We see the bloody hole suck the blood back in and the wound closes. As Gideon saying, oh no, shit on me. Shit on me. We get this awesome shot of Eric with his head down and he slowly picks it up and saliva is dripping out of his mouth, much like Skarsgård did with Pennywise in the latest It movie. I feel like the inspiration for this is farther than most can imagine.
And he will also be in the new Crow. He is the new Crow.
Correctamundo. Eric chucks Gideon across the counter. Eric jumps on the counter and into the air, but never lands. Gideon grabs a bat, turns around and swings it, but no one's there. And like Batman upside down, Eric comes swinging down head first and says, Mr. Gideon, you're not paying attention, and clunks him in the head with the bat. Eric then takes Gideon's hand, breaks the glass counter, takes a knife and jams it through his hand. Gideon screams. Eric covers his mouth as he's still screaming and says, I repeat, a gold engagement ring, yes? And Gideon shakes his head, yes. Eric says, it was pawned here a year ago by a customer of yours named Tintin. He confided in me before he ran out of breath. Cut to Tintin's dead-ass body being carried out on a stretcher. He's got like 6 knives. They're all dug deep into his chest. Looks like part of his chest is ripped open. And there's Torres and Albrecht. Torres asks, who's this sack of shit? Albrecht says, Tintin, one of T-Bird's helpers. Albrecht tells Torres he can rule out accidental death. Torres asks if any of these street demons have real grown-up names. Albrecht says, this doesn't look like the usual gang crap. Torres says, spare me. You're a beat cop. Be a beat cop. Albrecht says, suppose I have you to thank for that. Torres tells him, watch his mouth. Torres looks up and says, what the hell do you call that? And in blood, there's an outline of a crow on the wall. Albrecht says, it's called blood, detective. I suppose you'll write it up as graffiti. And Torres tells him to fuck off.
Yeah, and we're getting our bat signal. Our shape. He's going to do the crow shape.
Oh, it's the bat signal.
Right. So we're getting our crow shape.
Crow signal.
Yeah, the crow signal. Oh, then he's not signaling anyone else. He's just leaving it. Yeah, he's just leaving it for people. But yeah, I'm happy that these guys are getting offed. I'm super into these guys getting offed. And you also notice that Eric Draven starts to get into this more and more because he gets more and more playful as it goes on. He does a little dancing around and other things, and that's where we get a lot of Heath Ledger's Joker. And sadly enough, Heath Ledger passed away at 34, Brandon Lee at 28.
Crazy.
All right, 34. I'm sorry. Bruce Lee passed away at 34. Brandon Lee and Heath Ledger both passed away at age 28, the same age.
Crazy.
But yeah, wild. But he definitely kind of owes a lot to this performance. And I think it's safe to say that Brandon Lee would have been a huge, huge star after this film.
Back at Gideon's, Eric is trashing the place. He's asking if he's warmer. Don't you know this game? Gideon tells him rings are in a metal box. Eric finds them and sits on the floor. We cut to a flashback of him and Shelly going up to their attic. It's full of candles. Eric opens the box of rings. He's going through ring after ring after ring, throwing them aside. He closes his eyes. He's chucking all the rings and stops at one and concentrates hard. Flashes back to Shelly opening a box with a ring in it. Eric opens his eyes and it's the ring. He looks immediately sad and says, Shelly. He puts the ring on his finger. We get a shot of the lovers hugging and cut back to Gideon's and Eric knocking over gas cans all over the place, stalking menacingly. Gideon pulls out the knife. Eric throws the box of rings on the counter. He points a shotgun in Gideon's face and says, you have one chance to live. Gideon says, take anything you want. And Eric smiles and says, thank you. Eric pours gas all over the place and says, now tell me where to find Tintin's party pals. Gideon gives them up immediately. The pit. They all hang out at the pit. Fun Boy lives upstairs. Eric says Fun Boy and gets a flashback of Fun Boy raping Shelly. Eric begins breaking the glass cases. He points the shotgun at Gideon and says, each one of these is a life. And he's throwing individual rings at him. A life you helped destroy. Gideon begs him not to kill him. He says, I'm not going to kill you. Your job will be to tell the rest of them death is coming tonight. He then pours the remainder of the rings down the barrel of the shotgun. Says, tell them Eric Draven sends his regards. He turns around, grabs a black guitar, and heads for the door. Gideon yells, you walk out of here, they're going to erase your sorry ass. You're nothing but street grease. Eric turns around and says, it's that gasoline I smell. Walks out the door, guitar in one hand, shotgun in the other. The crow flies out the front door. Gideon runs out the back. Eric turns around, points the gun at the store, and he fires at the camera, and we see the rings fly out of the gun, and the entire Gideon's pawn shop explodes.
And this from the comic is a lot. The character, the actor that they get to play this character, he looks a lot like the character in the comic, the drawing. And I think he says kerosene, I think, is in the comic and not gasoline, but it's very similar. The scene, this grungy pawn shop and this whole scenario. But I have to say, Gideon is like he's gonna get off and then he's not, and then when he's walking away, you're like, you start yelling at the guy like you're tough. Like and then he does this later on with Top Dollar too. Like
Gideon's got some balls to him.
Yeah, but it's just not like smart. Like I'm surprised that a guy who has this pawn shop and deals with all these kind of people has lived this long of a life with a mouth on him like that.
He's talking shit to Tintin, talking shit to everybody. Yeah. We cut back to the pit. Sarah's at the bar drinking a root beer. Darla and Fun Boy go up to his room. The bartender tells Sarah he can't do anything about her mom, and Fun Boy, technically, she's off right now. And Sarah says, yeah, way off. Eric is leaving Gideon's in flames and pulls Sergeant Albrecht in his cop car. Points a gun at Eric, says, police, don't move. Eric says, I thought the police always said freeze. Albrecht says, he is the police. He says, don't move. You move, you're dead. Eric replies and says, I say I'm dead. And I move, and slowly paces toward Albrecht, who points his gun and says, now, one more step, I'm serious. Eric bows in front of him and says, shoot if you must. Albrecht asks if he's nuts, walking into a gun. He says, are you high? Eric says, you don't remember me. Albrecht says, what are you talking about? Eric says, how about Shelley Webster? Do you remember her? Albrecht says, Shelley Webster is dead, my friend. Now move to the curb. Sadly, Eric heads toward the curb. Albrecht says he's going to wait for backup. Eric is too weird for him. Eric says, it gets better. Do you know T-Bird? He had a friend who shouldn't have played with knives. Like my coat? Albrecht says, you're the guy who murdered Tintin. Eric says, he was already dead. Looters begin stealing shit out of Gideon's shop. Eric says he died a year ago, the moment he touched her. They're all dead. They just don't know it yet. Albrecht looks away for a second to yell at the looters, and like Batman, Eric slides off and vanishes out of sight. Albrecht can't believe it. He says, guy shows up looking like a mime from hell. You lose him right out in the open. At least he didn't do that walking against the wind. Shit, I hate that.
And that looter, there's a looter they see like with the TV or whatever. That's James O'Barr. That's the guy who wrote and drew the comic.
That's awesome.
That's his cameo in this.
Cut to Top Dollar and his sister back at the club. She can tell he's restless. She's got a little fire burning on his long-ass family-style table. Top says, I just wish I had a little hunger again, that's all. She tells him to be careful what he asks for. He says he knows. He may get it. We see he's got this big-ass Tony Montana plate of cocaine in front of him. His sister nuzzles his nose with hers and says, there are energies aligning against you. Inside the cup of fire, we see the girl's eyeball from before it is burning. Top says, seeing is believing, isn't it? She blows out the flame and this large plume of smoke is coming out of the cup. Top Dollar deeply inhales it, samples a little coke, and says, yummy. That had a smell and taste horrible. Grange and T-Bird enter the room. Grange breaks the news about Gideon's pawn shop. Top Dollar says no one cleared this with him. T-Bird says he had nothing to do with it. Top says, you must be awful disappointed. T-Bird says, I got trouble. One of my crew got himself perished. Tintin. Somebody stuck his blades in all his major organs in alphabetical order. Top says, let's have a moment of silence for poor old Tintin, and takes himself a big ass heaping helping snort of coke off his plate. He tells T-Bird he's working for him tomorrow. Top wants to know what happened to Gideon's. Was it a natural catastrophe or an act of God? Call it my need to know. Grange and T-Bird head out the door, and Top snorts himself another hefty line of cocaine.
And so is this? So he's above a club, above his club, just like in the Batman, how the
Penguin.
Penguin is above the club. But like, is this where he lives, or is this his office? This is where he lives.
It's probably like a side place. I'm sure he
Okay.
lives. I'm sure he lives where Bruce Wayne lives, and like his lair is here. Yeah.
Because it's like weird. Like, it's, what do? They just sit around and then like kill this lady and eat eyeballs and sniff cocaine, and
Yeah,
I
they're
don't
making
know.
profit. They're making that street profit. You just got to
Okay.
give orders.
So let's get to that real quick, Shawn. How do they make money?
Well, I mean, so I'm sure they're selling drugs. I'm sure there's some drug
Okay.
dealing going on. I'm sure they're robbing a lot of
So
people. I
they
mean,
murder Shelly and Eric because she complained about the conditions in the building on behalf of other tenants. So they kill them and then just leave it open. So that building's just an abandoned building. So how do you make money off an abandoned building?
and also, how do you make money burning down buildings?
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense to me unless you're like in the insurance business.
Hello, I'm Top Dollar. I'm calling on behalf of Gotham
Yeah.
City Insurance. Would you like us to burn your
Yeah.
residence or building down?
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird. It always confused me. And now that we watched it a few times leading into this podcast, I was thought this is the time that it'll make sense to me. I'll find the clue that it'll make sense. And it makes even less sense when you kind of pull a few layers back. It
But
makes
when
a
you
lot of
think
money,
about it,
obviously drugs, I guess, but
when you think about it, right? You got your Gotham villains, right?
Mhm.
Like, what's Joker and Riddler and Penguin? What enterprises are they're all they're doing is terrorizing things, and somehow they have endless amounts of uh income. And like, where does it come from? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, agreed. It's very much that he's there, very much a Batman villain in this. We're back in, you got us back in
I'm
Gotham.
staying in Gotham. I'm not leaving Gotham. Yeah, Detroit. You call it Detroit. I'm calling it Gotham. We get a shot of the Crow flying over the city. We see Sarah leaving the pit with her skateboard. She heads into the street, almost gets hit by a cab, till Eric runs up from behind and grabs her and saves her. And when he does, he gets a flashback of Sarah hanging out with Shelly. Sarah yells at the cabbie. Eric says he couldn't have stopped. Sarah says he was a butt face. She could have made it. The horribly sad music again from earlier kicks in as Sarah leans into Eric and says if he's supposed to be a clown or something. He laughs and says, sometimes. Sarah
Mm.
walks off to collect her board. It's more like surfing than skating. I wish the rain would stop just once. He says it can't rain all the time. And with her back to him, she slowly picks up her head and says, Eric, and looks back, and he's gone.
Mm. And I think she does a really good job. There's actually some heat online for the little girl that plays Sarah, and I thought she did a great job in the movie. But
Oh,
believe it
yeah.
or
People
not,
talk shit about her.
yeah, there was a little community of people I kind of discovered online where it was like, oh, it would have been better if it was a different this actress or
Yeah,
whatever
yeah, yeah, of
actor
course, because
playing this.
they're
But
they're accomplishing anything, doing anything. No, she's like the encapsulation of the '90s, punk rock kid on the street, skateboarding. Yeah, she is the '90s.
yeah, and I think she's meant to be obviously going to be a little quirky, a little weird. She lives an awful life. She's got an awful mom. I don't know we don't know who her father is. Could be somebody from the gang, right? Who knows? Could be Gideon from the pawn shop. I've no idea of knowing, but
It'd be Top
um,
Dollar.
it's also like super sad because you feel like in some timeline, if Eric and Shelly stay alive, maybe, maybe they adopt her. If something happens to the mom, maybe they bring her in and she has a completely different life. But yeah, I thought she did a great job.
We get this cool toy model practical effect shot of a train passing by in the rain, and the camera lowers to the front of the police precinct. Inside, Albrecht is at his desk smoking a cigarette. A nice lady drops off a folder at his desk. He tells her about the double homicide that happened last year, that Shelly was fighting tenant eviction, and that's why the house got raided by the thugs. He tells her, yeah, Shelly and her nice rock and roll boyfriend, Eric Draven, and he's looking at this photo of Eric and his band Hangman's Joke. She tells him the last time he was snooping around on a case, he got put back to being a beat cop. He says, Torres keeps reminding me. Albrecht takes out a pen and begins drawing the crow makeup on the picture of Eric's face. The lady takes a look at it and tells Albrecht he's going to end up working a school crosswalk. He laughs and says he's okay. She tells him he didn't get that file from her and don't tell me you owe me one. And as she walks away, he tells her he owes her one.
Yeah, and maybe this is why he gets in trouble, because he starts drawing on police evidence.
And not even hiding it. It's just out in the open.
Yeah, I think I would have just photocopied it and then drew on the photocopy. But
the crow lands outside of Funboy's apartment. Him and Darla are listening to music, shooting morphine. He's shooting Darla up and tells her tomorrow we can get high and watch the whole fucking city burn. Darla laughs, and outside the camera is scrolling up the side of the building and crouched on a fire escape like Batman or Spider-Man in the rain. It's Eric Draven with the crow on his shoulder.
And the jacket hangs, the way that jacket hangs down too, it's like tail feathers on a bird. It's very cool. Very cool.
Crow flies off right up to Funboy's window. The crow flies into the room where Darla and Funboy are making out, and Darla says, there's a big fucking bird over there. Funboy looks and says, it's a squab. I don't know what a squab is. Funboy's smarter than me. Is it a raven? Is it a crow?
So a squab is a young pigeon that people eat. So they call it a squab. They'll cook it and eat it. It's supposed to be very tasty. I've never had a young pigeon, but there you go.
Look at Funboy with the knowledge. And Vertebrae. Darla and Funboy laugh as Funboy is saying, come here, birdie, birdie, birdie. The crow is looking at Funboy, and Eric can see what the crow sees and climbs into Funboy's window. Eric slowly walks into the center of the room and he says, here, Funboy. Goes up to a light bulb hanging from the ceiling and begins lightly nudging his head against it. Funboy says, what the fuck? And Eric slowly runs up to the bed, scratching the string on his guitar as he's approaching, and stops at the edge of the bed and hits all the guitar strings, scaring the crap out of Funboy. He screams, don't do that! You nearly gave me a fucking heart attack. Funboy pulls out. Go ahead.
I was gonna say that like light bulb thing where he kind of runs his head along the light bulb. First of all, it's kind of a little, almost like a cat, like kind of rubbing against something, but it's really weird. I don't know, because I couldn't find out, but if that was like an ad lib, like if Brandon Lee just did that on his own to add some weirdness to the scene. But he does a lot of these little things throughout the movie that I think are done on his own, which just add to the weirdness and he's sad, but now he's having fun. He realized when he jumped off that building before he got Tintin and he starts laughing, that's because he died being thrown out of a window and flipping over and landing on the sidewalk, and he just did it on his own and he didn't die, and he's perfectly fine and feels fine and is about to, seek revenge for his fiance. Or so, yeah, I love all these little quirky things that he does throughout the movie.
Funboy pulls out his gun and tells Eric, it's time to take your bird and leave, freako. Eric hangs up his guitar on a coat rack. He pulls up a chair and sits at the end of the bed, facing right at Funboy's gun. Funboy cocks the gun. Eric puts his hand over the barrel, and it makes this cool shwunk noise. He says, take your shot, Funboy. You got me, dead bang. Darla laughs. Funboy says, you are seriously fucked up. Have you looked in the mirror? You need professional help. And he pulls the trigger. And that, my friends, I feel like is the perfect place to stop and wrap up this week of In Madness episode 29, part 1, one of my favorite movies of all time, The Crow. Vertebrae, what are your thoughts so far? How you feeling about this?
I'm feeling good. We've got a bunch to go still. What are we about? We're about halfway through the movie, a little less than halfway through the movie, and I'm excited. I have a little bit of a crazy theory coming up, and
I can't wait. I
in
can't
part
wait.
2 to send us down a tangent. And I'm excited, but appreciate anyone listening to us. If you do listen to us on, Apple or wherever, leave us a review. It helps kind of move us up the charts and have more people grow this, as Shawn would say, the In Madness family to larger. Send us emails. What's the email, Shawn?
So you could contact us on all of the socials at In Madness Pod. Our email is inmadnesspod@gmail.com. We also have a YouTube page. We also have a Spotify playlist, which has tons of songs added to it from this soundtrack. We also have merch, inmadness.com, for your In Madness podcast t-shirts.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone who's listening to us. And the audience is growing, and we appreciate it. And I am really excited to get into part 2 of this movie. So we'll see you in a week.
Yes, we want to know what you thought. Make sure you hit us up on the socials. Tell us all of your thoughts about The Crow. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Did you get into it late? Did you only watch it because we were talking about it? Regardless, let us know. And, maybe even talk about the new Crow movie if you're looking forward to that or not looking forward to it. We are open to all dialogue. Make sure you follow us on the socials. Make sure you email us, and we will see you next week for episode 29, part 2, The Crow in Madness Pod.